As in the previous tutorial, we have used the model object as a form backing element. That is, if a data is submitted by the user with the help of the form, then we use the model object. When the form is submitted, the properties of the model object got populated, and we have displayed the details of the user which is submitted by the user in the details page. But now what we want to persist this user object into the database. Persist means we want to save the data which is submitted by the user into the database. Now for this we need an ORM tool. Why we need an ORM tool is, as we are using the object oriented programming language as the core Java, and this is Spring framework, and we are creating the classes. Basically our project is having a number of objects which are collaborating with each other and having some dependencies with each other, and for the data they have to access the database. Now here some sort of mismatch happens. The mismatch is, as our language or the platform which we are using to develop our application is an object oriented platform, and our database is a relational database. So the object oriented technology is talking to the relational database. So the mismatch happens because if we are having one entity here, user, and we are having one table in the database and the name of the table is user, and that table contains like 10 rows or 10 tuples. Now we want that these 10 tuples should be viewed as the 10 objects are saved within the database. Like the name of the database table is user, and there are 10 tuples in the database, so all the data should be related to the user. So we want to view this as that the 10 objects of type user are saved within the database. When we are retrieving any of the row, any of the particular row from the database, we want to visualize it in a way that we are retrieving a persistent object from the database. That is, we want to query the database in a object oriented fashion. Therefore we need a tool like a ORM. So Hibernate is a ORM tool. ORM means object relational mapping tool. Now what is the mismatch, or how this mismatch can be removed or can be overcome? Now take an example. We have created one entity class, and the name of the entity class is user, and these are the 5 properties which are defined in the entity class: user ID, fname, lname, email, and mobile number. And there are some getters and setter methods, and there are for these properties. And we have created one table in the database, and the name of the table is user, and this table is having 5 attributes, and the name of the attribute are same as that of the attributes or as that of the properties of the entity. Like a property of the entity is user ID, and there is one attribute in the table, user ID. Fname property, fname attribute. Lname property, lname attribute. Email property, email attribute. Mobile property and mobile attribute. Now suppose 2 records are saved within the database. Now we want to visualize as this as these are the 2 objects which are saved or persisted within the database. Now if we want to get this particular row, or if we want to get this persisted object, and we want to access this lname property, what is the last name of this particular object, we can simply use the method get lname, and we will get the Johnson in the output. And there was also some problems if we want to use this database directly without an ORM tool, and that is our code requires the lot of SQL, and SQL is the database dependent. Like if we are using the database MySQL or SQL Server, these two database are having some sort of different queries. Like if you want to some insert the record in the database, then the insertion query or the insertion SQL for these two database, MySQL and SQL Server, the syntax is different. So our product or the project which we are designing becomes the database dependent product. Means if we are designing the product or our software using the SQL server, that it can only use the SQL server. We need some sort of database independence. That is, we have written the code once. Now our code can access any of the database, whether it is MySQL, whether it is Derby, whether it is SQL server and all that. So we need some sort of a SQL neutral query language like this HQL. HQL is the Hibernate query language, and this query language is a database independent query language. It can query any of the databases. Like if we want to save this entity, user entity into the database, we have to only write the line save, and we have to pass one user object as a parameter. Then this object will be saved into the database. To update the database, we have to again pass the object and the database will be updated. If we want to retrieve a particular row or a particular object from the database, we have to pass the ID and this object will be retrieved from the database. If we want to get if we want to delete if we want to get a user from the database, then again either we can use find or we can get. Now if we pass the user ID 2, then this particular object will be returned. If we want to delete the user, whatever object we pass here, that particular row will be deleted. If we want to perform select all, like select star from user to get all the rows, then we have to write the query like create criteria, then the user.class.list. Then we can retrieve all of the rows within this table in the form of the collection of the objects. So these are some of the benefits of using the Hibernate as a database. Now if we are using the Hibernate as a ORM, now you can access the database in a object oriented manner with the help of the HQL, which is a database independent query language. Now you can query any of the database. If you are developing a software and you want to migrate from SQL Server to Oracle, that without changing the code you can migrate from SQL Server to the Oracle. Now how to integrate the Hibernate with the Spring framework? Now these are some of the advantages of using the Hibernate. Like it is a open source and lightweight. Open source means it is freely downloadable in the form of jar file. Fast performance means there is a two types of caches which are provided by the Hibernate, like a primary cache and the secondary cache. Primary cache is provided by default and you have to create the secondary cache, because if you are retrieving or you're firing the query like select all and further you want to retrieve the second, third and fourth row, then the whole of the table will be saved into the primary cache and the query will not hit the database, it will only hit your cache to retrieve the results. And it also provides the database independent query language, which is known as Hibernate query language, and automatic table creation. Like if you have defined a model class user, then you no need to create the table in the database. This your ORM will create the table automatically. Now in this video we are going to exactly this. Like we will define one model, and when we integrate the Hibernate with our framework, that particular table will automatically be created in the database. In this tutorial I am going to use MySQL as a backend database. Now what we have to do to integrate this Spring framework with the database? First I have to define some of the properties. For that, as we have created one directory structure in our the project which we are building, like hello world XML. In this Java resources folder, there are the subfolders or packages like src main java, src resources. So in the resources folder, we have to create one property file, that is the database.property file. Now what that property file will exactly contain? It will contain some information about the database, like the driver which you are using. Like here I am using the MySQL database, so I will specify the driver for the MySQL database. You can easily get this information by using Google. If you Google the database driver for MySQL, it will return the string that this is the string you can use to connect to the MySQL. Now we will also use the dialect. Dialect is basically is provided by this Hibernate. Since Hibernate can be used to query any of the databases, then the dialect for every well-known database is available with this Hibernate. So we have to search for a suitable, or the suitable means if we are using the MySQL database, then I am using here MySQL dialect. This I will also again discuss when I will include the jar files of the Hibernate. Then I will show you from where I pick this name MySQL dialect. Then you need one URL string for the MySQL. This URL string can also be you can get by Google by inquiring the URL string for this MySQL server. So this is the query string, and this is the username, and this is the password for the MySQL server. Now I will, in the resources folder, I will create one file like new file. This is the file, and I will name this file as database.properties file. Database.properties file. Now I will open the source of this file. I will paste all the properties like driver. I am going to use this driver. Dialect, I am going to use this dialect. When I will add the HQL Hibernate libraries in the class path, then I will show you from where I have selected this MySQL dialect. Then the URL of your database, and the username of your database, and the password of your database. So we have created one property file, and we have put the property file in the resources folder. Okay. Now secondly, we have to create, or we have to edit our Spring Servlet file. Now we will open our Spring Servlet configuration in the src folder, in the main web app, in the webinf. We got this file here like this, Spring Servlet XML. Now in this file we have to add the code for integrating the Hibernate with the so I will add this code in this file. After this, our view resolver. So here I have pasted the code. Now I will explain this code, what we have done here. Like first we have to create the data source. In the data source we provide the all the specifications like the class which we are going to use, the URL of our database, and the username and the password for the database. Now this is the class which we are going to use. Like in the JDBC you use the class driver manager. Now here the class is driver manager data course, which is provided with the Spring framework. Now the one property name is driver class name. Now the driver class name you have specified $database.driver, because this property get retrieved from this property file, like the database.driver is com.mysql.jdbc driver. It will pick the value from the property file. Like the second property is URL of the database is database.url, because you have specified the property here, database.url, then the database username and the password. Now this session factory is used to inquire the database, like you do in the JDBC get connection, and the connection is provided, and with the help of that connection you can query the database. So this session factory is sort of a connection which will provide the connectivity. It will first open the database connection, performs all the queries which need to hit the database, retrieve the results, and then it will close the connection. So you can visualize this session factory as a connection, and it is provided by the local session factory bean. Now as a data source, you provide this reference data source, the reference of this bean, and then you have to provide the annotated classes, like we are using here the user class, which we need to persist into the database. So we will provide the complete or the full qualified name of the class, that this class should be persisted into the database. Now when we run this project, it will search for the database name OSS. We have created one database OSS. You have to create the database OSS. Then it will search for the table user, whether it exists or not. If table user do not exist within the database, the Hibernate will create that table automatically, depending on the properties which you have defined in the model class user. If that table is having 5 properties, then the 5 columns get created within the database according, and the data types will match the data type as you have defined in your class. If your user ID is of type long, then it will be of type big int in the database. If your email is of type string, it will be of type varchar in the database. This will be done by the Hibernate automatically, so no need to create the table. Then here we have to tell the Hibernate about the dialect which we are using. I will discuss about the dialect when I will install all the jar files. And this is the Hibernate show SQL true. It means all the queries which are fired by the Hibernate onto the database will be displayed on the console. Now this is also an important part, that is the annotation transactions. The one of the advantages, there are the many advantages of using Spring framework, but one of them advantage is that it removes the boilerplate code. Boilerplate code means the code which a developer has to write again and again in different methods. Like if we want to query the database, then we have to first open the connection, and then we have to then either commit the query or roll back the query, and we have to write this in the try catch block. So this is the code which we have to repeat in at the many places and in the many layers of our software. So if we are using this transaction manager, then by using the annotation transaction, there is no need to write the database code. All the queries will get started, and if there is no error, they will be auto committed by the Hibernate transaction manager. And here the Hibernate is using its own class for this, like the Hibernate transaction manager. Now for this transaction, we have to also include the namespace. The name of the namespace will be tx. I will provide this complete file. This is the Spring Servlet file as a comment below this tutorial. So we have added this namespace tx here, and we have to also add the packages which are to be scanned. Like there is one more package which need to be scanned, like we are going to place our entities in the model package as we have designed the user class in the previous tutorial in the model package. And again we have to specify here the path of the properties file. Since we are the Spring framework search for the properties. Now with this I have mentioned that the property file or the database property file within the database.properties, as we have created the resources folder, so all the resources are kept within the resources folder. So it will automatically search for the resources folder for this properties file from where the Hibernate can retrieve all the properties. And we add one more line here. This is to assure that if table user do not exist within the database, then create the table user within the database. Now what we have done, we have created one bean named data source, we have created one bean session factory, and we have created one bean transaction manager. So we have created a total of 3 beans. One is data source, one is session factory, and one is transaction manager. Transaction manager to remove the boilerplate code to perform the transactions within the database. Session factory is like your connection object as was written in your JDBC, and this data source provides the database configuration like your URL of the database, driver of the database, and the username and password of the database. And then we have added one more package to be scanned, that is the model package. Now first we have added the file database.properties, means we have created the file. Secondly, we have write the configuration in the spring.xml, and third, as a last point, we will edit this file user.java. It is here. In the model package there is one file, this user.java file. Okay, now in this file I have to annotate this class with entity. Now this annotation will inform the Spring framework that this is the entity, means this class will behave like an entity or the model for your project, and we want to persist this class within the database. Then if table user do not exist in the database, in which database? In database OSs, then this table get created in the database. Now we have to import this annotation. First we have to import all the Hibernate packages. For that we have to edit our POM file, or we have to add some dependencies into the POM file. Now after this we have to add the following dependencies into the POM file. These are the 2 Hibernate dependencies. Now if you want to find these dependencies using an internet, in Google, you simply write the query, take this artifact ID, that the Maven dependency for Hibernate core. Then this complete dependency you can get there. You can simply copy this dependency and paste, like Maven dependency for Hibernate validator. You will get this dependency, copy that and paste it here. Now since we are using the MySQL server as a database, and we need the driver for the MySQL server, so we have to also add this dependency of the MySQL server. So we will add these 3 dependencies into the pom.xml file in our project. So since our project is having 1, 2, 3, now here I will paste the dependencies that are the Hibernate dependency and the SQL dependency within the dependency stack. Now I save this file. When I save this file, you can see here dependencies are getting downloaded from the internet. Now all the dependencies have been downloaded. We can verify it by using libraries, and then the Maven dependencies, you can see here the Hibernate core and Hibernate JPA and Hibernate commons and Hibernate validator, which you are going to use to validate our form data. These all dependencies are added into our class path. So as we have used this MySQL as a dialect, so from where we get this MySQL dialect, if we search for the Hibernate core. Now this is the Hibernate core, and in this Hibernate core there is one package dialect. If you open this dialect, now these are the dialect classes for all the well-known databases. Like the class for MySQL dialect is this MySQL dialect, for Postgres is this, for SQL Server we have to use this dialect, for Oracle you have to use this dialect. So you can use any of the databases in your project. So we have added the dependencies in our file. Now I have to import this entity from the javax.persistence package. Now what I want is, I want one user ID which can act as a primary key for this our entity user, and it is always a good idea to keep one auto generated primary key in your table that can act as a primary key for your table. Now this user ID will be auto generated by the database, so I have to use these two annotations. First is ID, and this ID told the Hibernate that this is the ID column. It means this is the primary key for our table this user, and generated value will told auto generate the values for this user ID. Now we are done with the user. We have only add these three annotations in our model class which we have built previously. Now we will run our project. As we have not designed any of the JSP pages, we are simply only integrating our project, integrating our Spring framework with Hibernate. When we run project, what we expect that the table name user should got created in this our database OSs. As we can see, there is no tables in the database. So when we run this project, the user table under this tables get created. Now we go and run the project. Now finish. Now when the project is compiled, we get no page here because we have not configured any GSP and we have not seen what our controllers are doing. We are only interested in integrating the Hibernate with our Spring framework. Now let's see the output which is generated by the user. As you can see, this table has been created by the Hibernate, and this query is fired automatically by the Hibernate. We have not created any query for creating the table user. Now the create table user, because we have created one entity user and we have marked with the annotation entity. So this query is created by the user according to the MySQL server, like user ID big int not null because this is primary key, because we have generated it with the ID element, and then email, fname, lname, mobile number, and then primary key user ID. Now let's verify whether the table in the MySQL server with the name user has been created or not. First refresh this, and when we see this tables, yes, we got this table user with the columns user ID, email, fname, lname, and the mobile number. If we copy onto the clipboard the create statement and we query this, now this is the create statement which is generated by the Hibernate. Create table user, user ID big int, email varchar. Since the user ID which we have used here was having a data type of long and remaining were having the data type of string, so Hibernate has taken the care to declare email as a varchar, fname as a varchar, this as a varchar, and user ID as big int, and the table has been created within the database. So our integration of the Spring with the Hibernate is successful. So we have added these dependencies. Now our objective is to perform the CRUD operations, that to create that to create or insert the row into the database, to read the data from the database, to update the database, and to delete the record in the database. And also we will perform these operations after validating the user data. That will also be the important part in our this tutorial. So before firing these queries into the database, as we have successfully integrated the Hibernate with the Spring, first we have to implement the service and the data access layer. We are going to this architecture because this is a standard architecture which is used by the industry nowadays. If you are creating a Spring project from the scratch, then your design will contain one service layer, one data access layer, then the controller, and then the presentation layer. So in this tutorial we will use the same architecture which is in use nowadays. So in the next tutorial we will create the service layer and the data access layer, and then in the next video we will start by inserting the records into the database.